when there are other things in the affidavit or affidavits at that point that could explain that, including the use of covering clothing and covering gloves and all that could be put into a bag real quick on the way out. Well, I said I wouldn't do this, but I'm going to do it anyway because you brought up blood DNA of an unknown individual that was found, I think, on the handrail.
Yes.
Doesn't that necessarily not exclude Mr. Koberg? What it may do is suggest there might be a potential other person in addition involved.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
Listen to Pavarotti. Can I be your superhero?
Hello, welcome to The Revealing. I am your host, Pavarotti. I'm here to discuss the Idaho 4 case. And you know, across this long process of digging into all the details in this case, we have got a lot of things right. We've got some things wrong along the way. Well, it's very clear to me now that the hearing on January 23rd for the Franks motion and the motions to suppress, there was a couple of things in that hearing that I put in the opening of this video that was very, very strange, that really piqued a lot of our attention. And it certainly piqued mine, and it made me really come to some conclusions that were the wrong conclusions. And what I like to do is along the way, as more information makes itself available to us, is anytime I've got something wrong, I like to go in and correct it. A lot of people say, oh, Bob he never says he gets anything wrong. No, that's totally untrue. I get things wrong all the time. And when I get enough information to correct my wrongs, I always correct them. Because now I got a pretty good idea of what we were witnessing in that hearing. And it also lets me in on where the possible divorce of the defense team from the expert witness, Brent Turvey, actually took place. And it's kind of plain as day to me now. And when I say the divorce took place because of the issues that came up in this particular hearing, I'm not necessarily saying that it was a rightful divorce, because in my humble opinion, as we really get into the expert opinions of Brent Turvey and Matthew Nodal and Paulette Sutton, I believe I'm going to disagree, even though I haven't seen the entire opinions of anybody yet in this case. We've only seen rebuttals, but I believe I'm going to disagree with all three of them vehemently. But I can understand from a strategy standpoint why the defense would want to divorce themselves from the opinion of Brent Turvey, because it went totally against the opinions of Nodal and Sutton. Even though Nodal's opinion is going to be completely different than Sutton's and Turvey's in different ways. But I'm going to try to make all that sounds very confusing plain as day in this video as I go through and explain what it is that we looked at that time and what the truth of the matter truly is and why disagreements would have come up. And you can clearly see it in the hearing in the face of Ann Taylor when the judge brings up certain things, how it threw everything completely off for them. So what I'm going to do in this one is I want to break down those particular instances in that original hearing where my determinations of what they were talking about were incorrect now that we have more information, and what the strategy of the defense was, why it was blown up, and why they would have wanted to move away from Turvey and his determinations, even though I think Turvey's determinations are probably closer to the truth in a lot of ways than the defense expert, Matthew Nodal. I know all that sounds clear as mud. Let's see if I can make it unclear and unclear. Let's see if I can make it a little bit more clear as we go through this. Hold on to your hats, folks. This is getting interesting. So here's what I now know. Prior to the January 23rd, 2025 hearing on Franks and the motions to suppress, the defense filed motions for that hearing and submitted their expert opinions in the motion to back up their claims, and the state filed their response that included their expert opinions. In those opinions were the expert opinions of Brent Turvey, Matthew Nodal, and Paulette Sutton. Matthew Nodal and Brent Turvey being the defense experts, Pauline Sutton being the state's experts. And here's how this played out. And I'm going to show you in this why Ann Taylor, where the animosity probably started between her and Turvey, and why she was moving away from Turvey going forward. And just so I can make it known, I disagree with what all three of these state experts actually came to, but that's here nor there. Because during that hearing, there was a couple of things that I focused on back in the day that I thought was telling us a tale, and I now know that I was wrong. And one of those things was when the judge clearly cited an affidavit that stated that somebody had likely taken their clothes off, the assailant involved had taken their clothes off and put it in a trash bag. I assumed that the judge was citing early affidavits from Bethany, that maybe Bethany had seen somebody naked, because we all heard those stories, putting their clothes in a trash bag and run out the door. And I thought that made the most sense. But now I know that I was wrong on that. And here is the actual part of the hearing where he discusses that.
Would cause any magistrate to say, well, okay, I guess there's no probable cause here because you couldn't find other connection to forensic evidence, when there are other things in the affidavit that were affidavits at that point that could explain that, including the use of covering clothing and covering gloves and all that could be put into a bag real quick on the way out that was in one of the affidavits.
Then again, because he kept citing that was in one of the affidavits, I unwittingly assumed that he might be talking about Bethany Funk, because we had heard that Bethany Funk maybe had seen a naked person. But now I know what the judge is referring to when he says was in one of the affidavits. Maybe somebody taking their clothes, their covering clothes off and putting it in a trash bag before they left. He was talking about the affidavit of Paulette Sutton and her expert report, because her expert report absolutely suggested that the assailant was running around naked and put his clothes in a trash bag before he left. So I was wrong on that. And now I have a clear understanding of what this judge was citing in a lot of his arguments when he's arguing with Ann Taylor. The first one being the affidavit of Paulette Sutton saying the suspect took his clothes off, probably put it in a trash bag before he left. Which brings me to my next point. Paulette Sutton's entire theory focused on a sole perpetrator. She used examples of him taking his clothes off, putting it in a trash bag. She attached to her expert report the article on evidence of absence is not absence of evidence. And I believe her entire interpretation is ridiculous. But when I look at what the defense was trying to do in the Frank's suppression hearing, now it makes total sense why, even though I believe this is the wrong defense strategy, because this isn't the truth of what happened in my opinion, I can understand the defense's strategy at this point. Because if a state expert is basing everything off of a sole perpetrator, then you have her expert, Matthew Nodal. And this is just my opinion because we haven't seen Matthew Nodal's report, but here's what I suspect from everything that I've researched. Based on everything I've seen, the report that Matthew Nodal submitted is likely a report that, although that differs in many ways from both the Turvey and Sutton reports, but I believe Matthew Nodal's report is going to determine that one perpetrator is responsible for the act. Now, I obviously disagree with that wholeheartedly, but I can understand the defense strategy. If Nodal bases everything off one perpetrator, the prosecution expert bases everything on one perpetrator, then it makes sense what the arguments were in the Frank suppression motion. The obvious defense strategy was the defense argued in the suppression motion that based on the reports of these two experts, that the perpetrator is that one perpetrator committed the crime, and the evidence of that perp is unknown male B and D. Therefore, it could not be Brian Koberger. This was absolutely their argument in the hearing.
It seems to me that it's an uphill battle to say there's not probable cause at that point.
Well, Your Honor should never get to that question, but I'm going to answer it for you. But you should never get to that question because you should have already found that AT&T 1 and AT&T 2 were terrible, and there's no probable cause for those, and they just build on each other. So you should find that the very first one lacked probable cause, and then everything else does as well. But let me answer your question there. If the magistrate judge had been told there's unknown male B in blood in the house attached to the handrail, that might have made more of a difference to her. Maybe a sheath that can be carried to the house and blood in the house that's not the same, maybe that matters. And then maybe the car being completely empty of any blood DNA connection, maybe that matters a little bit more. Maybe it.
Well, I'm just not sure why it matters for probable cause, but I think we're talking over each other, so I'll let you just go on.
Okay. I don't think probable cause is in a vacuum. I think probable cause isn't one thing. I hope it's not one thing. I hope there has to be a little bit more than one thing, especially when you've got another thing that's the same as the one thing.
Well, I said I wouldn't do this, but I'm going to do it anyway because you brought up blood DNA of an unknown individual that was found, I think, on the handrail.
Yes.
Doesn't that necessarily not exclude Mr. Koberg? What it may do is suggest there might be a potential other person in addition involved if you assume that that blood was related to the victims and not some earlier event in the house.
If what the court is saying is exactly why the magistrate needed to know that. Is there another explanation here? I've got this sheath, but there are all these other things that if I know about them matter. What's the other explanation? What's going on with this investigation? What's happening here? That's exactly the point, Your Honor. What other explanation is there?
Now, at the time of this hearing, I did not know about the expert report from Brent Turvey, because in his expert report, he submits a report claiming that 2 perpetrators were necessary to commit the crime. So when the judge brings up the fact that there is reports that more than one person could have been involved in this crime and rebuts Ann Taylor's argument about the samples of blood from unknown male B and D simply being maybe somebody helped Koberger or maybe Koberger had helped somebody else, it absolutely froze Ann Taylor because she knew where the judge was citing this particular argument against her. And you can see by her reaction, this is the exact point in this where she goes, dang, Turvey has really messed us up. Watch.
Exclude Mr. Koberg. What it may do is suggest there might be a potential other person in addition involved if you assume that that blood was related to the victims and not some earlier event in the house.
If what the court is saying is exactly why the magistrate needed to know that. Is there another explanation here? I've got this sheath, but there are all these other things that if I know about them matter. What's the other explanation? What's going on with this investigation? What's happening here? That's exactly the point, Your Honor. What other explanation is there?
Now, again, I'm not saying that the defense strategy is correct at this point, but I think it's pretty clear to me now why the Turvey report just annihilated the argument in the Franks hearing, because other evidence of another perpetrator would eliminate Koberger from being the perpetrator if it's a one perpetrator crime. But the second that the defense expert claimed that there was more than one perpetrator, it gave the judge the ability to just overrule the argument altogether based on an expert opinion. So let me be clear. It's my opinion that all three of these experts are incorrect based on my interpretation of all the evidence of the crime. The Povman's report, who, by the way, no one cares about, so nobody cares about my report, but my report concludes that 4 perpetrators are necessary to carry out the crime in the time frame estimated based on all the physical evidence and the witness statements. You see, everybody else, and I mean everybody else, the state, law enforcement, apparently the defense experts, the state experts, the defense themselves, the state prosecutor, everybody wants to just say the witness statements are false. I mean, we see that in the probable cause affidavit when they change Dylan's entire statement to Kaylee being in the living room playing with Murphy to Kaylee being upstairs playing with Murphy and dancing. I mean, they change it all together. The defense in trial says that Dylan has to be lying because what she's stating couldn't possibly have happened because Kaylee and Maddie never left their room. So I am in everybody on YouTube. So Dylan's a liar. Dylan's a liar. Can't believe her statements. I am the only person that absolutely believes Dylan and Bethany's statements when they say Kaylee was in the living room playing with Murphy. She runs upstairs, says someone's here, runs back downstairs, and then nobody hears her again. I absolutely believe that is true because there is all kinds of evidence that is true with Kaylee's blood in the living room. What nobody else wants to try to wrap their mind around is how did Kaylee get back up in the room with Maddie before the attack actually continues and finishes. But I'm the only one that believes that because I believe the evidence proves that statement. And it's very clear to me. It's very unclear to everybody else. They'd rather just say, well, Dylan is lying or Dylan was drunk and she mixed up Kaylee with Xana. And then they go as far as to say, well, and even later on, Dylan admits that who she heard could have been Xana. And that is not true in any sense. Dylan is very, very clear that who she heard in the living room was Kaylee. Who she heard run up and down the stairs yelling someone's here is Kaylee. The only part that Dylan conceded was that she may have been wrong about who was crying in the bathroom. She thought it was Kaylee, but it could have been Xana. She never says she was wrong about it being Kaylee in the living room playing with Murphy, running up and down the stairs screaming someone's here. And you can go back and listen to that as many times as you want, and you're not going to come to any other determination if you listen with an open mind. So I think that's where everybody in the case gets this thing wrong, and I get it right, but that's just my opinion. And again, nobody cares about my opinion. But the obvious defense strategy at this point was the expert reports of Nodal and Sutton. They argued in the suppression motion based on the reports of these two experts that one perpetrator committed the crime and the evidence that the perp is unknown male B and D, therefore it could not be Brian K, was upended by the Turvey report suggesting more than one perpetrator that gave the judge the ability to cite that report and overcome the argument. The expert report for Turvey claiming there was 2 perpetrators that was necessary to commit the crime upended the entire strategy of the defense in that hearing. And that is why I believe that they moved away from Turvey after that. So while I'm not saying that I agree in any way with Matthew Nodal, Paulette Sutton, or Brent Turvey for that matter, I am saying that the defense at the time had a clear strategy. And because they got expert reports from different experts that were contradicting, their strategy imploded on them in that hearing. What does that mean for today? I don't know. Because, again, I don't agree with any of their determinations of the things around this crime. And I will reaffirm why I've come to the conclusions that I've come to and why it's different than everybody else's in this case, and what everybody else has to ignore to come to their determinations that I refuse to ignore, because I believe the truth matters. Please like and subscribe to this channel. Post your comments, thoughts, criticisms. Till next time, Pavarotti's out.